Hello everybody, this is International Master Jesse Kraai, and today I'm going to be doing part 4 of a system against the French, and today we're going to look at the Winawer variation, which is bishop to b4. So with bishop to b4, what black does is he forces white to make a decision as to what he wants to do with the e-pawn, just like knight f6 also does. Now, I have to say it took me forever to put this up on the chess lecture site for two reasons. One, I'm a French player and I am very prejudiced against the move bishop to b4. And I've decided to be unapologetic about my reservations about bishop to b4, even though many strong players have played this move. Bishop to b4 in my eyes is a mistake because in many variations, black will take this knight, trade the knight, and in that case, he's going to lose his best bishop. And that bishop is important not only because his pawns are now on light squares, but also because the fight in this opening so often revolves around the e5 and d4 squares, which are black, and the bishop is useful in fighting for those squares. Okay, the other reason I took a long time in doing this lecture is originally I thought that I would recommend this move e5. And it's certainly a good move, e5, and I think white's going to have an advantage. A typical position is something like this. And this has, of course, been played millions of times, but I wouldn't want this position as black just because I've lost my nice bishop. But nevertheless, this is a position where there's a lot of theory, and this position even made it into John Paul Wallace's hot novelty of the week a couple of weeks ago in the main variation of the Winawer after knight c6, queen g4. I think white has an advantage there in terms of what the theory says at the moment. I also think white can play for an advantage simply with knight f3. But nevertheless, this is not what I'm going to recommend. I'm going to recommend something far more simple than all this. I'm going to recommend taking the pawn on d5. Now, I think some people are going to rebel against my judgment here because many people have prejudices against this position, this symmetrical position. They feel that black now has his bishop out, and there's nothing really for white to play for. But that's really not the case. And the first thing I want to do in this lecture is just make white's first move, which is a simple developing move, bishop d3. And I just want to talk about why white has the advantage here before we go into specific variations. So for one thing I pointed out in the first lecture against the French, kind of the introductory lecture, was that the exchange variation is a completely viable way to play, i.e. playing ed on move 3 for white, simply because white will be up a tempo. However, I gave some practical variations as to why that's no longer popular. And, okay, so that's black will probably be able to equalize in the normal exchange variation. But in this position, it's a little bit different. And the main difference really is seen in this move bishop to b4, because the bishop will now have a problem. He can either exchange himself for the knight, in which case white will have the two bishops, and he will also still have gotten black's best bishop, and he can also go back, say to d6 or e7. But in that case, black will have just lost another tempo. He's already down one tempo. So if he goes back, he's going to lose another tempo. Let me just say a couple words that I know I said a little bit about in my lecture on the philosophy of the French, but it bears saying here as well. It seems like the position is so open that we wouldn't want to talk about good bishop and bad bishop. But in fact, it's an important topic in this position. The pawn on d5 is black. And that means that black's dark square bishop will have still more mobility than the light square bishop. And even here, part of the system against black is that we're going to try to make it uncomfortable for black to move his bishop on c8 out. And we'll see that in a couple of these games, that it's still a somewhat of a problem piece, even though it has a free diagonal at the moment. Okay, so there's a bunch of different things black can do, and we'll take a look at the main variations here. But I thought what we'd do is we'd go over 3 games, 3 miniatures, against with the same 2 opponents. And in all these games, it was Igor Gleck, who was one of the big experts of the French on the black side, and he was playing white against Igor Naumkin in 3 separate games. And what's interesting to me about these 3 games, played over a period of almost 10 years, is that in this apparently simple position, Naumkin was unable to find really an answer to what white was doing here. And I'm going to go through these games kind of quickly, just to illustrate some of the main ideas, and then we're going to come back to this position and look at some of the other moves that black can try. Okay, so Naumkin's first attempt was knight c6, threatening the d4 pawn. a3. Now, really black has a lot of options here, but none of them are too satisfying. Now, let's say he tries to preserve the bishop. If he goes here, the overwhelming strategical problem he's going to have is that that bishop, his good bishop, is going to be caught on the queen side of the board and won't be able to come back to these squares, which are going to be important for the defense of his king side and center. So the bishop is essentially sidelined where it doesn't want to be at the moment on a5. Okay, let's look. If he goes to e7, we have this very cute move, bishop f4. And now we're just threatening to be a jerk and play knight to b5. And we're also setting just a very mean trap. So bishop f4, probably a6 is the best move. And in this kind of position, I would say we don't really even need to discuss it too much, because white's up so much time that almost any plan he chooses now, knight e2, knight f3, he's going to have an advantage. But so if black takes the pawn, then we have a very nice trap. Bishop b5 check, threatening the knight on d4, so he has to take. And now there's no adequate solution to the problem on c7, and black is lost. So, in this game, Naumkin took, and we took. Now, white's advantage of being up a tempo has now been transferred into a different kind of advantage. Now he has the 2 bishops, and this pawn on c3, although it's doubled, is really putting the tsuji upon the knight on c6, limiting its squares. Let's see how this first game went. This is Naumkin, or Gleck Naumkin, 1993. Knight e7, queen h5, bishop e6, rook b1, just a simple move. Notice that white's moves are for the most part simple. Queen c8, knight e2. Now, let's just think about black's problems here. He can't castle because of queen h7 mate. And if white is able to play knight to g3, what he'll have done is stop that bishop from coming anywhere useful, in particular f5. So, as a result of this, Naumkin then really makes a mistake. He plays bishop f5, and now we transfer knight f4. And now Naumkin realizes he's in deep trouble, because if he trades now on d3, then he'll also have to defend this pawn on d5. And it's not so clear how he can do that without severely weakening his position. So, he went back. Castles, knight d8, rook e1. He still can't castle. c6, a4, h6. Now he's getting ready to castle, but now bishop a3 comes. Queen d7, queen e5, threatening g7, knight h5. Castles knight h5, f6, queen g3, and it's just a mess. g5 was played, f4, rook f7, breaking the pin. But after bishop e7, black had to resign. because if rook takes, then knight takes pawn, and if queen takes, f5. So this position that looks completely symmetrical, looked easy for black to defend, in 21 moves, it was over. Let's take a look at the next battle, which took place 5 years after this encounter in 1998. Okay, so in this next battle, now we can play knight f6, and now bishop g5. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that this is very similar to a position I discussed in my lecture against the McCutcheon, where we discussed in that position also taking on d5 and what would happen if black played ed. And we would get a position similar to this, where black just has a very simple problem in that his knight on f6 is pinned and his bishop on b4 is wondering what it's doing there. So Naumkin's solution in this game was to say, okay, I'll just go back. I have a symmetrical position, but I'll just break the pin, and hopefully this will be okay. However, I think here what we're going to see is that the extra tempos here are definitely very important. Knight e2, c6. Castles, castles, knight g3. A very typical idea now for white. This knight will find itself useful on the king side. Rook e8, rook e1, h6, bishop f4, bishop g4, queen d2, knight bd7. So it looks as if black has successfully completed his development. But actually he's in a little bit of trouble. Let's look. Knight d1, very good move. So that knight on c3 was dominated by the c6 pawn, and now it's going to come to the king side where it will make itself useful. Knight f8, knight e3. Notice that our power on the king side is just stronger than black's, and we're still up ahead in time because our queen is better placed than his queen, and his bishop on e7 is going to have to move at some point. And he does that now. But now it's just simple. Knight g4. Now he can't take on f4. We'll just take back and we'll guard our g4 knight. And if he takes the knight on g4 now, we just play rook e8 and we're winning a piece. So he has to give us the e-file. But now it's all over with just very simple moves. Knight f5. Queen has to go away. Rook e7. You can't play chess like this. You can't let your opponent in. Queen d6, queen f4. So now we're threatening knight h6, and then the knight on f6 will fall. So he plays knight h7, queen g3, g5, or excuse me, g5 is not possible because of knight h6. So knight g5, but simply h4, and black is going to lose a piece. And black resigned a couple moves later. Okay, let's look at the third and final example, which was played in 2001, so 3 years after this last game. And in this game, Naumkin returned to knight c6. So in this third encounter from 2001, Naumkin returned to knight c6. a3, takes, knight e7, queen h5, bishop e6, rook b1, b6. So in the last encounter, from almost 10 years prior to this, in 1993, Naumkin played queen c8, now he plays b6. But I think already he's in a bit of trouble. The two bishops are very powerful in this position. Knight f3, queen d6, knight g5, knight takes. Now we have the clean two bishops. Knight a5, rook e1, queen f6, bishop c1. Simple chess. c6, rook e3, knight c4, rook g3. It's like clockwork. We're threatening bishop takes h6, king h8, rook e1, knight g8 to defend against bishop g5, winning the knight. So, rook e1, knight g8, but now simply rook f3. And there's no way now for the queen to defend f7. And after this series of moves, black realizes that if he doesn't win the pawn on a3, he's going to be lost. So knight a3, rook e6, and black had to resign. So, let's return to the original position. Okay, so let's return to this position. And one of the things I just want to say I really like about this position is that I think many black players will simply underestimate the power of white's potential here. Even though we saw in those last 3 games that black can lose very, very easily with... And it's not even clear really what he did so fundamentally wrong, and he got punished immediately. And I think that's a big psychological advantage in any kind of chess opening, where if you understand your advantage and it doesn't seem imposing to your opponent, then it's particularly dangerous in that case. And I also think what's nice about this position is this position will be more about ideas than the highly theoretical e5, which I'm sure white gets an advantage in that position, but it's a lot to memorize and think about. And even then, black's going to be very prepared in many variations. Here we're just playing a simple game of chess where black's at a disadvantage. He's put his bishop out on a square it really doesn't want to be. And we saw in those games that if black takes on c3, that his bishop is gone from the defense, and that bishop would have been vital to his defense. And if he goes back, then he loses a tempo. So I just wanted to look at one further variation here, just because it seems to me it would be my first thought if I was playing the black pieces here. My first probably instinct here as black would be to try to play c5, trying to exploit or open the position as soon as possible. And if black could get away with this, then I think he could maybe equalize. But the problem is I can just take it and see, first of all, you can't really just take back, because I'll play knight takes d5, right? Because queen takes d5, bishop d5 wins the queen. So, the testing move for black would be to play d4. But then we can play a3. And the key position really is this: bishop a5, b4, takes, takes. And this is an important position to think about for this system against the Winawer. The point is that those 2 pawns on a5 and c5 will probably fall. But the pawn on c3 will also fall. Okay? Now let's just think about why white has the advantage here. White has the advantage because he has the 2 bishops, he's up a tempo, and those 2 bishops are looking directly at the king's side. So with these 3 minor pieces, he'll be able to gather an initiative both in the center and on the king's side. And this position looks very dangerous to me for black. So in all these positions, what we're seeing is really, even though it looks very innocuous, the position is very dangerous. And I'll just say on a practical note, what probably will happen when you play ED is you might get an opponent who rolls his eyes kind of like a queen who's been insulted. Kind of like saying, what, do you want to draw against me by playing the exchange variation of the French? And I ask you only then to laugh in your heart, because your opponent is getting himself in a situation where he thinks it's going to be a drawish position, but we've seen from the 3 demonstration games that it's not at all drawish, and that black has to be very careful, and is in fact probably already in a little bit of trouble. So this is International Master Jesse Kraai, having concluded part 4 of A System Against the French, and soon I'm going to discuss the variation D takes E4, both later and on move 3 for black. Bye-bye.